When my wife passed away, my son Bradley looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, you can't bring Mom back, but my wife's birthday only comes once a year." Those words hit me like a sledgehammer to chest. The next morning, he came crawling back with his hand out for money, as if nothing had ever happened. That's when I knew it was time to teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. It was exactly 8:12 a.m. when I realized the house had a new kind of silence. Not the comfortable quiet that settles after dinner when a woman you love turns off the lamp and laughs from the hallway. No, this was the crushing silence that presses down from the ceiling and settles behind your ribs like a weight you'll carry forever. I lay there staring at the hairline crack in the bedroom ceiling that Helen used to say looked like a skinny dog running. Every winter, she'd stand on the bed with a paintbrush, threatening to fix it but never following through. "Leave it," I'd tell her. "It's our good luck, mutt." Well, luck abandoned this house the same week she did. I forced myself up and put on the same black slacks I'd worn 2 days before. There was nowhere to go, but habit moves your hands before your brain catches up. I brushed the jacket with my knuckles, then let it hang on the chair like a flag of surrender. On the nightstand, Helen's reading glasses sat folded on Chapter 14 of the medical mystery she'd been halfway through. She was a nurse who loved these books because she could solve them early and still pretend to be surprised. The glasses were smudged. I could have cleaned them. I didn't dare. In the kitchen, her favorite white porcelain cup with a blue flower waited by the sink. There was still a faint lipstick ring on the rim. Sunday lipstick, she called it, the kind she put on for church and, sometimes for me, when we had absolutely nothing planned. I reached for the cup, then stopped. I couldn't break the pattern of where it sat, how it caught the morning sun from the window. That light would be the last thing of hers I'd disturb. The light in Cedar Falls that week was thin, like it was running out of itself by mid-morning. 2 days earlier, the morning of the funeral, I had dialed Bradley. 4 rings. Then his voice came through with bass, heavy music thumping in the background, the kind you feel in your bones. "Yeah, Dad." "Funeral starts at 11:30, I said, adjusting my tie like I used to before big construction bids. "I saved your seat up front." He cleared his throat. In the background, I heard Sam shouting something about bakery deliveries and helium canisters. "Dad, I told you yesterday. Sam's birthday party is tonight. We've been planning this for months. Your mother's funeral happens once," I said slowly, using the same gentle tone Helen used when asking embarrassed families for late payments. "You can't bring Mom back," Bradley said with sickening lightness, "but Sam only turns 32 once. We've got caterers coming and the DJs already setting up. You understand, right?" The line went dead. Not even a polite goodbye. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear until the dial tone sounded like a refrigerator humming in an empty house. On the counter, the funeral program lay open with Bradley Warren printed under pallbearers. I picked up a pen and drew one careful line through his name. My stomach lurched, but I capped the pen with the finality of a man closing a door he'll never open again. We buried Helen in a wind that cut through suit jackets like it had personal business with every mourner. 23 people showed up. Church friends, neighbors who remembered the summer she organized the block party, 2 fellow nurses in black cardigans, and sensible heels that sank into the soft ground. Patricia, Helen's sister, kept staring over my shoulder like Bradley might materialize if she looked hard enough. "Where's Bradley?" she whispered. "He had other commitments," I said. The words tasted like iron in my mouth. Mrs. Henderson from across the street patted my arm with a hand that smelled of lilac. She was always so proud of that boy. Talked about his new responsibilities at the company. Said you two were figuring things out. I nodded while watching dirt hit polished wood, thinking about a different kind of faith. The kind that insists your son will do the right thing because he knows you're watching. The kind that excuses his absence from chemo appointments because he's just busy. Helen's faith was a room. She kept adding furniture to long after the floorboards sagged under the weight. On the drive home, I passed the bakery where Sam ordered cakes that cost as much as truck tires. The window was fogged, and someone had drawn a heart with their finger. I drove past without stopping. I didn't want cinnamon rolls. I wanted to pull up to Bradley's house and pound on his door until my knuckles bled, demanding an explanation that included the word sorry. Instead, I parked in our driveway and let the engine tick as it cooled. The key turned with the same tiny click that had told me for 40 years that Helen was home safe. I hung my coat on the hook she'd installed herself, level and pencil behind her ear, daring me to say the line wasn't straight. The house made those settling noises old houses make, like it was resisting the idea that the day was over. I stood listening to it breathe, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. In the living room, Helen's favorite throw, a knitted thing she swore was hideous when she first saw it at a church raffle and then used every night for 10 years, lay over the back of the couch. The brown leather chair I bought on clearance because I told the salesman a chair is a chair, sat where it always sat, clashing politely with Helen's floral curtains. On the mantel, the wedding photo in its silver frame captured her at 23, wearing her grandmother's lace dress and looking at me like the whole idea of time was a rumor we didn't need to believe in. I slept in that chair that night, not from grief, or not only grief, but from a sense that lying in our bed would trick me into dreaming she was in the bathroom brushing her teeth and humming the hymn she always hummed when she didn't want to talk. Dreaming is the cruelest kind of mercy. The morning after the funeral, my phone rang at exactly 9:06. Bradley. For a split second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then Helen's voice echoed from somewhere deep inside me. "Answer your son, Franklin." I touched the screen. "Hey, Dad," Bradley said, breezy as a summer day. "How are you holding up?" "I'm here," I said. "Good, good. So listen, small hiccup. Sam's birthday was absolutely incredible. You should have seen the turnout. But with the upgraded liquor package and the late-night food truck, Sam's idea, but brilliant call, we went a little over budget. I'm looking at about $14,500 on the credit card that we need to clear ASAP. You know how statements work. Could you wire it to me? Today would be perfect." There was a version of me that existed right up until that moment. The version that thought, he's my boy. This isn't the hill to die on. The version that remembered Helen pressing her hand to my chest saying, "Don't be too hard on him. He's finding his footing." That version was polite and steady, convinced he could manage disappointment like a small tax you pay for a lovely life. I looked at Helen's picture on the mantel. I looked at the funeral program with the line through his name. I calculated the ledger of my tolerance. "No," I said. Silence. The sound of glass being set down too hard on a counter. "What do you mean, no? It's your bank account. I'm not giving you any more money." "Bradley, you're seriously doing this now? After the week we just had?" His voice climbed into disbelief. Behind him, I heard Sam say something about the deposit for Cabo, followed by muffled laughter. "You're 35 years old," I said. "You've got a job. Figure it out." "You fired me," he snapped, then tried to swallow it back. That was a fight for another day. He'd been drawing his salary from my construction company for years, the kind reserved for a project manager who showed up on time and returned phone calls and didn't expense $100 lunches on days the site foreman couldn't find him. "Dad, come on. I'll pay you back." I let the silence sit. Men like me are made of it. "I understand," I said finally. "Take care, son." I hung up. The phone felt light in my hand, like a tool finally used correctly. When you say no for the first time after decades of yes, the air in the room actually changes. It's like flipping a breaker and watching half the house go dark. I walked to my home office and opened the filing cabinet. Bradley's folders filled an entire drawer. Tuition, house down payment, wedding, cars, emergencies. The word emergency had been stretched to cover Miami trips, ski weekends, and a boutique puppy that turned out to be allergic to Sam's perfume. I spread the folders across my desk like evidence in a courtroom. Paper doesn't lie if you let it tell the truth. 4 years of college tuition. A house down payment that could have bought Helen a new kitchen twice over. A wedding that looked like a movie set rental. 2 cars. one temporary apartment paid for during a time when he transitioned between roles. A role is what a man calls a job when he wanted to sound like he can't be replaced. Vacations that were supposed to be experiences and ended up being debt I smoothed out before it wrinkled their lives. I wasn't angry then. I was meticulous. Helen used to say I got very still right before I made a big decision. She said it the way you say someone has a nice singing voice, kind like it was an attribute rather than a warning. I pulled out the calculator I keep for bids and estimates and let my thumb find its old rhythm on the buttons. The total number didn't scare me. The pattern did. Every check I wrote had a note in the memo line. Family helps family. I believed it then. I believe it now. The problem wasn't the checks. It was the exchange rate between help and respect. We were drowning, and I've been too busy bailing water to notice the tide going out. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat with the smell of it. Helen's favorite roast that I was always going to learn to make the way she did. The morning sun angled through the blinds and made little ladders of light on the desk. I remembered a night 30 years earlier when a much smaller Bradley slept between us because he had a fever, and I argued that he should be in his room, and Helen said, "Let him be small while he's small." She was always right about that. The trouble is some boys learn how comfortable the middle is and never want to climb back out. The doorbell rang at 11:03. No one rings before noon unless they have serious business. I opened the door to find Patricia holding a casserole and a sympathy card, hugging me like the past was a rope we could both still grip. "You look thinner," she said, then peered into the hallway, as if she might catch Helen coming downstairs with laundry. I kept expecting him at the graveside. He made other plans, I said. "Frank," she said, just my name. The way you say it when you're trying to move something heavy and know you can't do it alone. We stood there for a long half-minute. She put the casserole on the kitchen counter and looked at the lipstick ring on the cup and didn't mention it. That was kindness. After she left, the house settled again. The afternoons stretched endless and silent, and I felt something click into place like a gear finally finding its teeth. For years, I'd run two separate systems. The business, which followed rules and contracts, and the family, which ran on forgiveness and hope and maybe next time. Bradley had learned to read the family system and ignore the business one. He didn't think rules applied where love lived. I walked down the hallway to the spare room where Helen kept boxes with labels in her neat hand. Christmas lights, old photos, Kyle's art. Kyle was our neighbor's boy. We kept his drawings one summer when his folks divorced and forgot to take them back. In Bradley's school, I opened the last one. Report cards beginning in kindergarten. A gold star sticker that had lost its stick and lay against the bottom like a fallen coin. A note from Helen to me on an index card tucked between the 8th grade honor roll and a photo of Bradley in a band uniform with a trumpet he never learned to play. We gave him everything we had. I hope he remembers us kindly. I sat on the floor with that card and realized I could love my son and still decide he didn't get to write the ending of this story. At 2:45 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Sam. "We're dropping by at 4. Need to discuss something important." "No, please." No question mark. I put the phone face down and went to the backyard. The garden was the size of a single-car garage and entirely Helen's domain. She grew tomatoes that tasted like August and planted zinnias because she said they were a stubborn flower that didn't apologize for color. I stood there looking at the empty beds and the rusted spade leaning against the fence and decided that whatever came next would happen the way Helen did most things. Quietly, cleanly, without the kind of mess that makes neighbors talk. Revenge is a word for people who watch too many shows. Balance is what you bring to a ledger when you've been sloppy. They were late. At 4:28, a white SUV rolled into my driveway too fast. Sam stepped out first in sunglasses big enough to count as a hat. Bradley followed, tugging at the sleeves of a jacket I'd bought him for a Chamber of Commerce luncheon. They didn't knock. They walked in with the old habits of children who believe they're welcome by default. "Dad," Bradley said in the voice reserved for calls you need the other person take. "We need to talk." I gestured to the kitchen table. He sat. Sam remained standing, arms crossed. eyes scanning the room like she was considering renovation possibilities. Helen would have found that funny. I did not. So, Bradley began, interlacing his fingers the way he used to before asking for a loan he called a bridge. We overextended a bit with Sam's party. It was a milestone, and I said no this morning. I interrupted evenly. It's not just that, Sam cut in. We're planning a quick getaway to Cabo. I need a reset. Bradley promised. I turned to Bradley. What's the important request? I didn't look at Sam again. This was my son's voice I wanted on the record in my head. He glanced at her, then back at me. We need 15 to clear the cards, he said, and another 5 as cushion. 20,000, I repeated, like a foreman reading a supply order so everyone hears the number. Important request, I thought. A funeral behind us and a cushion ahead of them. I let silence do its work. No, I said. Sam snorted softly. You're being dramatic. No. I repeated, but to Bradley, not her. This is the last conversation about me funding you. There won't be another. Bradley's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a man who'd always found doors unlocked and was surprised to feel the deadbolt. You can afford it, he said, words coming out flat and small. Yes, I can. He swallowed hard. Mom would have. I raised my hand. He stopped. Your mother wanted you at her funeral, I said. The sentence was a tool I set down gently because I didn't need to swing it. Sam leaned forward. If you cut him off, don't expect us to come around much anymore. I understand, I said. The phrase felt clean in my mouth, like something I should have been saying for years. I stood. Thank you for stopping by. For a second, I thought Bradley might say something else. He didn't. He stood, looked around the kitchen like he wanted to memorize the inventory, then walked out with his wife. The SUV backed down the driveway, its chipped windshield catching late sun like a wink. When the house was quiet again, I went to the hallway and looked at the hook where I'd hung my coat that morning. The hook Helen installed with a level and a pencil behind her ear. People talk about closure like it's a ceremony. Sometimes it's hardware. I turned on the light in my office and made a list in the same notebook I used for construction bids. Call Michael Grant, the attorney who set up our will when we were still young enough to joke about who'd go first. Review company roles, not lines on an org chart, but responsibilities I had quietly shifted to Bradley because I didn't want to fight at Sunday dinner. Meet with the bank. Not tomorrow, but soon enough. Talk to Linda Moore, my secretary, who knew where every paper lived and who had eyes like a nurse, calm and exacting. I wrote the list without heat. The plan felt less like revenge and more like gravity finally asserting itself. You don't punish a son for a party. You teach a man that choices come with an invoice. You teach him gently if you can, and if you can't, you teach him with a number he can't ignore. In a hallway, the late sun had shifted to that pearly Iowa glow that makes even bad lawns look good. I stood in front of our wedding photo and said what I hadn't said out loud yet. I'm doing this for you, I told Helen. And for me. The frame reflected a small, tired man with a good shirt and a clean-shaven eyes that didn't blink at the truth. That night, I took the funeral program out and smoothed the fold. Bradley Warren was still there with a line through his name. I didn't tear the page out. I didn't throw it away. I slid it into a plastic sleeve and filed it in a drawer marked estate. Not because I wanted to keep score, but because I wanted a record. A man who builds houses from blueprints knows that what you write down becomes real. I slept in the bed for the first time since she was gone. I lay on my side of the mattress, careful not to drift toward hers, like crossing that invisible seam would be a trespass. Sometime after midnight, I woke and listened to the house breathe and knew calmly, not cruelly, that 6 months from now, Bradley would be standing in a different kind of quiet. The kind you hear when the music stops and you finally understand who paid for the band. I closed my eyes and pictured the garden in spring. Zinnias, tomatoes, a line of small stakes marching down the bed with twine pulled tight between them the way Helen liked it. An order that looked like kindness from a distance, balance that held its shape even in the wind. There's a difference between silence and stillness. Silence is what you get when a room is empty. Stillness is when everything in the room is holding its breath. The house had been still since Helen left it for the last time. That morning, after Bradley and Sam drove away in their spotless SUV, I found myself walking the hallway like I didn't belong there. Every picture frame on the wall carried some version of us. Helen holding Bradley on the day we brought him home from Mercy Hospital. The three of us standing in front of the house when the paint was still fresh. Bradley's graduation photo, where he was grinning under a cap Helen had ironed 3 times so it wouldn't crease. I stopped at one I'd forgotten we had. Bradley at maybe 8 years old, cheeks sunburned, holding up a bluegill he'd caught at Clear Lake. Helen had her arm around his shoulders, sun hat tipped back, proud as any mother could be. I remembered the way she clapped her hands that day, how she told the other fishermen on the dock, first one he ever caught, as if they'd been waiting all morning to hear that news. Bradley used to look at me the way boys look at their fathers when they still believe they can do anything. He stopped looking at me that way a long time ago. I couldn't tell you the exact year. Maybe it happened in pieces. One missed promise here, one easy dollar there, until it was gone completely. After the funeral, I'd kept busy with things that didn't matter. Sorting mail, tightening kitchen cabinet hinges, cleaning gutters. I told myself it was about keeping the house in order. But the truth was, the minute I sat still, the memories came, and they came in color. Helen in her nurse's scrubs leaning against the kitchen counter after a 12-hour shift, still smiling at me like I was worth coming home to. Helen on Christmas Eve, sitting cross-legged on the floor, wrapping Bradley's gifts with newspaper when money was tight, and somehow making it look intentional. Helen at the dinner table listening to Bradley talk about his day, her face open and soft, even when his stories were nothing but complaints about homework or who got the better seat on the school bus. She never told him no without a reason, and she never stopped believing he'd grow into the man she saw when she looked at him. It's not like Bradley was a bad kid. He wasn't. He was clever, funny when he wanted to be, and good with his hands. He could have been a builder like me. Maybe even better. I'd taken him to job sites in the summers, showed him how to read a level, how to measure twice, and cut once. But he'd get bored after an hour and start scrolling his phone or wandering off to talk to someone. Helen would tell me, he's just young. He'll find his focus. Except young kept stretching. 25, 30, 35. And somewhere along the way, he learned that in our house, love meant never letting him hit the ground. If he stumbled, Helen or I would reach out and steady him. If he fell, we'd cover the bruise and tell him it wasn't his fault. After Helen's diagnosis, things got worse. I never told her how much it bothered me that Bradley didn't come to more of her treatments. He came to the first 2, sat in the waiting room scrolling through real estate listings for houses way out of his budget, then said the drive was too much with his schedule. Helen defended him even then. He's busy with work. We don't want him to worry too much. Work? That word tasted bitter, knowing most of it came from the company I'd built from the ground up. A company that carried his name on the payroll like a promise I'd never thought to question. The night before the funeral, I'd gone into the spare room, Helen's room really, the place she kept boxes of holiday decorations and old letters. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lavender from a sachet she'd tucked in a drawer years ago. I opened a box labeled Bradley School in her handwriting. Inside were layers of his life. Report cards with notes like excellent progress and needs to focus in class, awards for perfect attendance, team photos from Little League and soccer. Tucked between them was an index card with Helen's careful script. We gave him everything we had. I hope he remembers us kindly. It wasn't a plea. It was a record. Helen was a nurse. She documented things. But seeing it in her hand, knowing she'd kept it hidden, made me sit down on the floor like someone had knocked the wind out of me. I thought about the money, not just the big things. The tuition, the down payment on his house, the wedding. But the small rescues. The emergency transfers for vacations. The checks to cover Sam's boutique when it fell behind on rent. The time I canceled a weekend trip with Helen to lend them money for a new HVAC system because Sam's parents couldn't help right then. Helen would press her lips together in that way she did when she wanted to say something but decided against it. She'd remind me that helping him now would mean he wouldn't have to struggle later. I nod because I wanted to believe that was true. But standing in that room holding that card, I realized that later never came. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery alone. The sky was the color of old pewter, heavy with clouds that hadn't decided whether to rain. I walked to Helen's grave, the grass still raw around the headstone. I knelt, not caring that the knees of my jeans would get damp, and told her about the morning's conversation with Bradley. I said no. I told her. The words felt strange, like trying out a tool you should have been using all along. And I meant it. I half expected the wind to pick up, some sign that she approved or disapproved. Nothing happened, just the steady quiet of a place where people don't argue anymore. On the way home, I passed the office. Warren Construction, painted in dark green on the glass door, the same way it had been for 35 years. I thought about how many times Bradley had walked through that door with coffee in one hand, late but full of excuses. How many times I let it slide. I pulled into the lot and unlocked the door. The air inside smelled like sawdust and printer toner. My desk was the same stacks of bid folders, a level and measuring tape at one corner, the photo of Helen in her scrubs taped to the hutch. I sat down and opened the drawer where I kept the employee files. Bradley's folder was thicker than most, not because of commendations, but because of warnings, missed deadlines, expense reports that didn't match receipts, client complaints. I closed the drawer. This wasn't the day for that, but soon. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I wrote 2 columns at the top, family and business. Under family, I listed every time we'd bailed Bradley out. Under business, I listed every accommodation I'd made for him at the company. The paper filled quickly, lines crowding each other until there was no space left. Looking at it all in one place made something click inside me. This wasn't about grief or even disappointment. It was about boundaries, the ones we'd let him cross, so often he didn't see them anymore. Helen had always said I was good at building things straight and level. I realized it was time to do that here, too. The next morning, Patricia called. She asked how I was holding up. I told her I was fine, which was the answer people expect, not the truth. She hesitated, then said, "Frank, I'm worried about Bradley. He's been saying things about how you're being cold, that you're shutting him out." "I'm not shutting him out," I said. "I'm holding him accountable." Silence on the line. Then, maybe he needs both. Maybe, but accountability is coming first. After he hung up, I sat with my coffee, black the way Helen drank hers when she needed to stay awake for the night shift, and looked out at the yard. The garden beds were empty now, just rows of dark soil. Helen used to say, "A garden tells you the truth. You get out what you put in. You can't fake growth. You can't rush it. And if you neglect it, it shows." Bradley's life was a neglected garden that had been propped up with store-bought flowers. It looked fine from the curb, but it had no roots. That afternoon, I pulled out Helen's old recipe box. Not for the recipes I can't cook much beyond eggs, but because she had things in there. Between index card for pot roast and banana bread, I found envelopes, savings bonds we'd bought for Bradley when he was a kid, notes she'd written to me on anniversaries. One was from a year Bradley graduated from college. We did it. He's ready for the world. I closed the box and set it back on the shelf. Ready for the world? Maybe. Ready for a world that didn't require effort? Absolutely. I started making a new list. This one shorter but heavier. 1. Meet with Michael Grant. 2. Review company structure with Linda Moore. 3. Check the status of any accounts where Bradley was a beneficiary. 4. Update the will. Each item was a step towards something Helen might not have done herself, but I believed she would understand. Love doesn't mean handing someone the keys to everything you built. Sometimes it means locking the door until they can prove they know how to use it. That evening, as the sun went down, I walked the perimeter of the house, checked the fence, ran my hand along the railing Helen used to paint every other summer. The wood felt solid under my palm, worn smooth by years of work. I thought about the first time Bradley fell off his bike. He was 6. We were at Morrison Park, the same place I'd taught him to ride. He scraped his knee and looked at me. waiting for me to rush over. Instead, I told him to get back on. Helen had been upset. He's hurt, Frank. But later, she admitted I'd done the right thing. He'd been riding again within minutes. Somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten that lesson. I'd started picking him up before he could even try to stand. It was time to stop. I went inside, washed my hands at the kitchen sink, and looked at Helen's cup again. The lipstick ring was still there. I left it not because I couldn't clean it, but because it reminded me of the way she lived, fully present, even in the smallest things. Tomorrow, I told her, though she wasn't there to hear it. Tomorrow we start. And for the first time in weeks, I meant it. It was raining when I pulled into the parking garage beneath the Grant and Holloway building. The kind of slow, steady rain that makes people hunch their shoulders and hurry as if it could get inside their coats and rearrange their bones. I called Michael Grant the night before. We'd been friends for more than 20 years. He'd drawn up Helen's will, handled the incorporation papers for Warren Construction, and given me quiet legal advice over coffee more times than I could count. He knew me well enough not to ask why I wanted to meet. He just said, "Come in tomorrow. We'll talk in my office." The elevator smelled faintly of wet wool and the paper coffee cups people carry like talismans in bad weather. On the 12th floor, the doors opened to a reception area with dark wood paneling and shelves full of law books whose spines were worn but still dignified. "Frank," Michael said when I stepped through the doorway into his office. He rose from behind a mahogany desk that looked like it could have been carved out of a single tree. The skyline of cedar falls spread out behind him, the rain streaking the glass. "How are you holding up?" "Better than yesterday," I said, and meant it, though better didn't mean good. He gestured for me to sit. I took the leather chair across from him, the kind that creaks in a friendly way. "I need to make some changes," I began. "To the will, to the estate plan, to a few other things." Michael leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "All right, what's the scope?" I reached into my briefcase, the same one Helen had given me on our 10th anniversary, embossed with my initials, and pulled out a folder. "Scope is removing Bradley entirely. No inheritance, no access, no decision-making authority if something happens to me." Michael didn't flinch, but his eyes held mine a moment longer than usual. "Frank, that's not something you undo easily. Are you sure this isn't a grief decision?" "I'm sure," I said. "This isn't about grief. It's about patterns I've let run for far too long." I told him about the funeral, about the phone call the morning after, about the years of bailouts and second chances that hadn't taught Bradley anything except how to spend other people's money. Michael listened without interrupting, though his jaw tightened when I mentioned Helen defending Bradley even during chemo. When I finished, he tapped the pen against his notepad. "All right, first, we'll draft a new will. What's the beneficiary?" "The Helen Warren Foundation," I said. "Scholarships for underprivileged kids, cancer research funding, community projects in her name." Michael nodded, making notes. "We'll also need to change beneficiary designations on your life insurance, retirement accounts, and any payable on death bank accounts. Those supersede the will if left untouched." "I've already made a list," I said, handing him a sheet in my handwriting. "I want it airtight. No loopholes." "We can do that," he said. "And Frank, I'll need to document your mental capacity for these changes, just in case Bradley challenges them later." "That's fine. Do whatever you have to." As we worked through the paperwork, the rain outside eased into a mist. Michael slid a draft of the will across the desk for my review. "This language here explicitly disinherits Bradley and any descendants," he explained. "And this clause moves all company shares into the foundation upon your passing." I read each line carefully. I'd built houses from blueprints. I knew the importance of getting the plan right before laying a single brick. "Looks good," I said at last. Michael leaned forward. "Frank, you know this is going to change your relationship with him permanently. There may be no way back." I thought of Helen's cup in the kitchen, the lipstick ring still on it. "That relationship ended at the cemetery," I said. "I just stopped paying for the privilege." By the time I left the office, the clouds had begun to break. Patches of pale blue sky showed between them, as if the day had decided to give itself a second chance. I drove straight to Warren Construction. The office smelled faintly of sawdust and printer toner, a scent I'd come to associate with both possibility and headaches. Linda Moore, my secretary for 12 years, looked up from her desk as I walked in. "Morning, Frank," she said, then lowered her voice. "I've been meaning to talk to you about Bradley." I raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway that led to the project manager's offices. "He's been late more than usual. Missed 2 client meetings last week. And, there's some expense reports I think you should see." In my office, she closed the door behind her and handed me a thin folder. I opened it to find receipts, high-end restaurant bills, networking events that didn't match our calendar, a hotel stay in Des Moines that didn't align with any project site. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. Linda's mouth tightened. "I've been documenting for 6 months. I thought maybe he'd self-correct, but it's getting worse." I set the folder on my desk, the paper cool under my fingers. "Thank you, Linda. Keep documenting everything." She nodded. "Frank, I hate to say it, but if his last name weren't Warren, he'd have been gone months ago." "I know," I said. "That's about to change." After she left, I sat for a long time staring at the folder. My name was on this company, my reputation, and every corner cut, every deadline missed, every dollar wasted by Bradley reflected on me. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the employee handbook. The section on termination for cause was clear: documented performance issues, written warnings, final review. If Bradley thought family ties would keep him safe, he was about to learn that business has its own gravity. But not yet. Timing mattered. Helen used to say, "You can't pull a cake out of the oven just because you're hungry. It's got to be done all the way through, or you ruin it." I slid the folder into the drawer next to the handbook. That evening, I went home and made myself a sandwich. Ham, mustard, nothing fancy. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter, looking at the garden through the window. The soil was dark and wet from the rain. Helen would have been out there checking the drainage, making sure the seedlings weren't drowning. I thought about the foundation I was creating in her name, about the students who might go to college because of it, about the families who might get help during treatment. The idea settled over me like a warm coat. This was more than cutting Bradley off. This was building something that would outlast both of us. 2 days later, Bradley called. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice too bright. "Got a minute?" "I'm listening." "So, Sam and I have been thinking. We should have a family dinner soon. Clear the air. Maybe talk about next steps for me at the company." I could hear Sam in the background, her voice a sharp whisper. Bradley covered the receiver, then came back on. "Anyway, let me know what night works for you." "I'll think about it," I said and hung up. In truth, I'd already decided there would be no next steps for him at the company. Only an ending, executed cleanly and legally. But endings like buildings need a foundation, and I was still pouring concrete. I opened my laptop and started a new document, Bradley Termination Plan. Under it, I listed 1. Gather all documented performance issues from Linda. 2. Review expense reports for policy violations. 3. Schedule an HR meeting with Michael present. 4. Arrange security escort for the day. Each line felt like a beam sliding into place. Not revenge. Structure. That night, I sat in the living room, lights off, just the dim glow from the street lamp outside. I thought about the first time I brought Bradley to the office. He was 10, small enough to swing his leg from the chair in the reception area. I'd given him a clipboard and let him check the blueprints. He'd grinned like I'd handed him the keys to the city. I wondered what he'd see in my face now if I handed him those same keys. Probably just the lock clicking shut. By the time I went to bed, the decision felt settled in my bones. The wool was changing. The company was tightening. The accounts were shifting. Bradley didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him had already started to move. And when it finished, he'd be standing somewhere else entirely, a place where my money, my business, and my patience didn't reach. The morning of the quarterly meeting, Cedar Falls was dressed in the brittle light of late winter. the kind that looks clean from a distance but feels sharp when it hits your skin. I'd been awake since before dawn, running over every detail in my head. Not because I was nervous I'd built skyscrapers in my time, but because I wanted this to be clean, surgical. At 7 a.m., I was in my office. The blinds were open, letting in a pale wash of light across the desk with a folder on Bradley's performance lay waiting. Linda Moore had done her part. Each late arrival, each missed meeting, each unapproved expense was in chronological order with receipts and policy references. Next to it sat the revised organizational chart I'd worked on with Michael Grant. At 8:45, Linda knocked lightly before stepping in. "They're all in the conference room," she said. "Bradley included." "How's his mood?" I asked. She hesitated, then allowed herself the faintest smirk. "Confident." "Too confident," I nodded. "Let's not keep him waiting." The conference room was a glass-walled box with a view of the river. Long table, 12 chairs, a projector humming softly overhead. Bradley sat 2 seats down from the head, his phone in hand, thumb scrolling. He looked up when I entered and flashed a smile that was all teeth and no sincerity. "Morning, Dad," he said loud enough for the whole room. "Ready to talk big picture?" I set my briefcase on the table and took the head seat. "That's exactly what we're here for." The rest of the department heads glanced between us. They knew something was in the air. You can't work in construction without learning to smell a storm. I began with the numbers. Project completions were down 18% from the previous quarter. Client retention had slipped. Costs had overrun on 3 major builds. Each slide on the screen was a layer of brick in the wall I was building between Bradley and the company. When I got to the slide marked department performance, Bradley leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers behind his head, and said, "We all know Q4 is rough, Dad. Weather delays, supply chain." I cut him off with a raised hand. "Weather didn't cause you to miss a meeting with the Den Group. Supply chain didn't run up a $1,200 tab at Porter Steakhouse under networking. And neither one booked a hotel suite in Des Moines for 2 nights with no project site within 100 miles. A ripple went through the room. Bradley's smile faltered. "This isn't the time or place," he began. "This is exactly the time and place," I said, my voice low but carrying. "Because this company is not a family ATM, and it's not a playground for someone who happens to share my last name." Silence. The kind that makes you aware of your breathing. I slid a document across the table toward him. "Effective today, you are relieved of all decision-making authority within Warren Construction. Your title changes from Vice President of Operations to Special Projects Liaison. You will report directly to me. All expenditures must be pre-approved in writing." His face went red, then pale, like a traffic light running out of options. "You can't just demote me in front of everyone." "I can," I said, and I just did. The rest of the meeting ran on schedule. Bradley sat stiff in his chair, eyes fixed on the table, while I outlined the new reporting structure. When it was over, he left without a word, the door swinging shut behind him a little too hard. Linda appeared in my doorway 20 minutes later. "He's in the parking lot, pacing," she said. "Let him pace," I replied. "He's going to need the practice." That afternoon, Michael Grant came by the office. We went over the HR documentation, making sure every change was airtight. "You handled it publicly," he said. "That'll sting." "It was meant to," I said. But I also left him a rung to cling to. Special Projects Liaison. He thinks it's a lifeline. In reality, it's a sandbox with no toys. Michael smiled thinly. "You're playing the long game." "I'm building a structure," I said. "Every beam has to be in the right place." Over the next few weeks, I made sure Bradley's special projects were the kind that led nowhere. Feasibility study for sites we'd never build on, community outreach proposals that stayed in committee. He came into my office twice, trying to argue for more authority. Each time I listened, nodded, and told him we'd revisit it next quarter. Meanwhile, Linda and I kept documenting. Missed deadlines for those same pointless projects. Expense requests that pushed the limits. A pattern of behavior that on paper looked exactly like what it was: negligence. One evening, as I was locking up, I saw Bradley's car still in the lot. Inside, through the glass wall of his office, he was on the phone, laughing, feet up on the desk. The same easy charm that had gotten him out of trouble since high school. I stood there a moment, watching him. Then I turned off the lights and left him in the dark. At home, I poured a glass of the single malt Helen had given me on our 25th anniversary. I didn't drink much these days, but tonight felt like a milestone. The first strike had landed. Clean, controlled, documented. And Bradley had no idea it was only the beginning. I've always believed that good architecture is about two things: structure and purpose. Without both, a building is just a pile of bricks pretending to be something more. The same is true for a life and an exit plan. After the boardroom strike, Bradley stayed quiet for a week. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that means someone's regrouping, not retreating. I knew better than to think I'd seen the last of his attempts to get what he wanted. But I also knew I didn't have to wait for his next move. The time to shore up my defenses was now. The Helen Warren Memorial Foundation started as a line on a yellow legal pad. 3 words underlined twice. It wasn't just about charity. Helen had always wanted to formalize our giving. Scholarships for kids from construction families, grants for urban green spaces. She used to cut out articles from the paper and leave them on my desk with a post-it. We could help here. After she was gone, those clippings sat in a folder on my bookshelf. Starting the foundation wasn't just protection. It was a promise kept. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't also see the tactical advantage. Assets moved into a nonprofit with a specific charter aren't up for grabs and probate. And the founder controls the board. I called Michael Grant on a Tuesday afternoon. "I want the paperwork started this week," I said. "You're serious?" "I'm done being reactive," I told him. "I want everything Bradley could angle for in the next 10 years locked up, so tight he'd need a miracle or a moral compass to get near it." Michael's chuckle was short. "I'll draft the charter tonight." The first asset to move was the lake cabin. Bradley always thought it would be his someday, the same way he thought every asset with our name on it was just on loan until he showed up to claim it. I'd bought that cabin with Helen the year Bradley turned 5. We'd built the deck ourselves, stained it every spring, strung lights along the railing at Christmas. Selling it outright would have felt like tearing out a piece of us. But transferring it to the foundation, that felt like placing it in a vault where it could keep doing good long after I was gone. The proceeds from its seasonal rentals would fund scholarships for kids going into skilled trades: carpentry, plumbing, electrical. Helen would have liked that. 2 weeks later, I hosted a small dinner at my house. Just a handful of people: Linda, Michael, a few old colleagues, and Bradley, of course. Sam came too, wearing a dress that probably cost more than one of my pickup trucks. Halfway through the main course, I tapped my glass. "I've got an announcement to make." Bradley's eyes lit up the way they used to when he was a boy, and thought a surprise meant a new bike. "I'm starting a foundation," I said, "in your mother's name. Its mission is to support education and community development in Cedar Falls and beyond." Bradley grinned. "That's great, Dad. I could use my contacts for fundraising. I can help with outreach, maybe even sit on the board." I shook my head gently. Board seats are for those with a proven track record of stewardship and fiscal responsibility. You've got potential, Bradley, but right now your energy is best spent on special projects at the company. The grin froze, then cracked just enough for me to see the irritation beneath. After dessert, Linda helped me in the kitchen. "He's not happy," she murmured. "He doesn't have to be," I said, rinsing a plate. "He just has to be out of the way." Setting up the foundation gave me a legitimate reason to reallocate assets without raising suspicion. Shares in certain properties, a portion of the equipment leases, even the art Helen and I had collected on our travels pieces Bradley wouldn't notice missing until it was too late. Michael handled the transfers with precision. "Every signature," he reminded me, "is a brick in the wall between you and a future lawsuit. I'm building it higher every day," I told him. One rainy Thursday, Bradley stopped by my office unannounced. "So about that foundation. It's moving forward, right? But I was thinking if my name were attached, we could attract younger donors, modernize the image." "Your name," I said evenly, is already attached to the company. And its image could use some modernizing too. Maybe focus on that. His jaw tightened. You're cutting me out. I'm protecting what your mother and I built, I said. From everyone, even family. That night, alone in the house, I walked through Helen's old study. The lamp on her desk still had the same warm glow it always did. I opened the top drawer and found one of her notes, a yellow post-it, her handwriting looping and confident. Pride is fine. Legacy is better. I stood there for a long time, the rain tapping against the window, thinking about how legacy isn't something you leave to someone. It's something you leave for something. By the end of the month, the foundation was officially registered, its charter filed, its bank account funded. Bradley still didn't understand that every dollar moved into it was a dollar he'd never touch. And I wasn't about to explain it to him. There's an old saying in construction. If you want to test the strength of a beam, you don't stare at it. You put weight on it and see where it cracks. Bradley was no different. I'd been watching him circle the Helen War Memorial Foundation like a stray dog sniffing at a locked trash bin. Sooner or later, he was going to make his move. My job was to make sure it happened on my terms. Michael and I met at our usual diner on a Tuesday morning. The place smelled like bacon and burnt coffee the way it always had. He's getting restless, I told him, stirring my coffee, though I'd never put sugar in it. Keeps finding excuses to drop by my office, talk about the foundation, the board, the future of the family legacy. Michael smirked. Legacy is the word people use when they mean money. I nodded. Time to give him something to chase. The opportunity came quicker than I'd expected. The company was auctioning off a parcel of old machinery, bulldozers, cranes, half of it ready for the scrapyard. I told Bradley I was thinking of letting a few pieces go cheap to friends of the family who might fix them up. His eyes lit up. You mean like me? I shrugged. If you've got the cash and the plan, I'm not stopping you. What I didn't say was that the titles on those machines were already in the process of being transferred to the foundation. Bradley could pour every cent he had into winning the bid, but in the end, the paperwork would route back to me, legally airtight. Bradley spent the next week swaggering around the office, dropping hints to anyone who'd listen about his new venture. I caught Sam in the lobby one afternoon, her nails painted the color of wet blood. You know he's excited about this, she said, smiling in a way that didn't touch her eyes. It's nice to see him focused on something big. Big projects need a solid foundation, I said. Otherwise, they collapse. She tilted her head. Is that construction advice or parenting advice? Both. The auction was held in the company warehouse, the air thick with oil and old dust. I watched from the sidelines as Bradley waved his bidder's paddle like a man at an all-you-can-eat buffet. He won 3 machines in less than 20 minutes, outbidding a couple of contractors who shot him look sharp enough to cut steel. When the final gavel fell, he strode over to me, grinning. See? I'm investing in my future. You should be proud. I'm always proud when you work for something, I said. Let's get the paperwork sorted. 2 days later, Michael called him into his office to finalize the transfer. That's when the twist landed. The titles were in the foundation's name, with Bradley listed as a short-term lessee, legally binding and unbreakable without board approval. Bradley stormed into my house that night without knocking. What the hell is this? He shouted, slapping the lease papers onto my kitchen counter. Looks like you've got access to some fine equipment, I said, pouring myself a whiskey. Lease terms are fair. Use them well. You tricked me. No, I said calmly. I gave you exactly what you bid on, access. Ownership was never on the table. His face flushed crimson. You're cutting me out of everything. I'm making sure you can't burn down what your mother and I spent a lifetime building, I replied. The silence after that was thick enough to choke on. He grabbed the papers, crumpled them, and stormed out. I let the door slam. Linda called later that night. He came by my place, ranting about you. Said you're trying to humiliate him. I sighed. Humiliation requires an audience. This was private. Just me and him and his reflection. For the next month, Bradley avoided me at the office, but I could feel him moving in the background. Quiet calls, meetings he didn't put on the calendar. Even Sam's social media posts felt like coded messages. New designer bags, a casual shot in front of a luxury condo downtown, captions about big changes coming. I'd seen this kind of restlessness before in rivals who'd run out of legitimate plays and were about to try something stupid. So I set the stage. At the next board meeting, I announced the foundation's interest in acquiring a small but promising development lot on the edge of town. It's under review, I said, making sure Bradley could hear the casual openness in my voice. We'll need investors to match the foundation's pledge. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. This was his chance. At least that's what he thought. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, he came to me with a proposal, a plan to buy into the project using a private LLC he'd set up. What he didn't know was that the lot had zoning issues that made it a money pit for anyone not holding the right permits. The foundation, of course, had an inside track to fix those issues at no cost. Bradley's LLC would bleed cash until he walked away or came begging. The day he signed the preliminary agreement, I watched him across the conference table. His penmanship was sharp, almost aggressive, like he thought writing fast would make the deal more real. "Congratulations," I said, sliding the papers into a folder. "You're officially part of something bigger." He smiled, and I smiled back, knowing full well that something bigger was going to crush him long before it lifted him. That night, I sat in Helen's old study, the rain tapping against the windows again. I opened her notebook, the one she used for grocery lists and budget notes and the occasional recipe, and found a single line she'd written years ago. "You can't save someone from a fire they keep starting." Bradley thought he was outsmarting me, but all I was doing was handing him the matches and making sure the wind blew in his direction. By the time the first notices went out, the maple leaves along our street had turned the color of rusted pennies. I remember standing in the doorway one morning with a mug of coffee cooling in my hand, watching a jogger pass, wondering whether the paper taped to Bradley's front door would be peeled off before he left for work or after he came home. It didn't matter. Either way, the words were the same: notice of default. I didn't learn about it from him. I learned about it from the bank. "Mr. Warren? David Harrison here, First Iowa. We need to discuss the Maple Ridge mortgage." I glanced at the calendar. There were red dots on 3 consecutive squares where I'd marked meetings with Michael Grant, one with our accountant, and a quiet breakfast with Linda Moore to review documentation. "Go ahead," I said. "There have been missed payments," Harrison said, choosing his words like someone picking their way across an icy sidewalk. 60 days as of this morning. Because you're a guarantor, our policy is to contact you before proceeding." "I understand," I said. "Schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning. I'll bring my attorney." He hesitated. "Mr. Warren, you've extended a guarantee for 8 years. We appreciate the relationship. You'll appreciate clarity more," I told him and ended the call. I sat there a long minute, the phone still warm in my palm, listening to the house breathe. The old furnace kicked on, a low hum that made the kitchen glasses tremble in the cabinet. There was a time when I would have driven straight to Bradley's house, knocked hard enough to wake him, and said something I didn't mean about helping just this once. Helen would have been waiting in the car, hands wrapped around a thermos, believing love and reason could be poured into a man like coffee into an empty cup. Those days were done. At the bank the next morning, the lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper. Sunlight made a lattice on the floor through the mullioned windows. Michael Grant met me by the elevator and put a hand on my shoulder the way a man steadies another who doesn't need it but appreciates the gesture. David Harrison's corner office overlooked the river. He was younger than I expected, hair combed straight back, tie knotted tight. He shook my hand like he was meeting a former governor. "Thanks for coming on short notice." Michael set his briefcase on the table and clicked it open. "We'll get right to it," he said, his voice even. "Mr. Warren is withdrawing his guarantee on the Maple Ridge mortgage, effective 30 days from today, per the contract." Harrison's eyebrows moved just enough to register the shift beneath his feet. "We would prefer not to escalate," he said carefully. It's always been a pleasure working with your family. And it will continue to be, I said, but through the appropriate channels. I kept my son from the consequences of his choices for a long time. I'm done with that. He looked to Michael. We'll need written notice. Michael slid a letter across the desk. Already prepared. We'll also need confirmation of receipt. Harrison skimmed the page, color draining from his face by degrees. You understand this will force us to begin foreclosure proceedings if the loan isn't brought current. I nodded. Do what you must. He called in his legal counsel, a woman in a navy suit with glasses perched low on her nose. They read the letter together, murmured the language back and forth, and agreed there was nothing to contest. Policy was policy. Law was law. The bank would do its job. On our way out, Harrison tried on a smile. Please tell your son to come in. We'll work with him. He'll find out soon enough, I said. Outside, the air had that late autumn bite that stings the inside of your nose. Michael walked with me in my truck, hands in his coat pockets. You all right? Fine, I said. And I was. Not happy, not vindicated, just settled. A beam had found its post. News travels in a town like ours the way water finds the easiest path. By the end of the week, I heard it in murmurs at the diner, saw it in the way the pro shop manager at the country club avoided eye contact when Bradley came in for his usual Friday foursome. A member's wife stopped me near the coffee urn and spoke in that soft tone people use when they're about to say something not soft at all. I was surprised not to see Bradley at Helen's service. She paused, studied my face, then made a small hum that said she confirmed the rumor she came to test. At Romano's, where Sam loved to be seen more than she loved the food, the hostess suddenly couldn't find their reservation. At the yoga studio, where she filmed herself in mirrored walls and posted captions about alignment and gratitude, the owner told her they were at capacity for membership renewals. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was math. People take measures. They assign weight. A man who skips his mother's funeral to inflate his wife's birthday matters less than the man who showed up for 40 years straight. Bradley tried to salvage the narrative. He called 3 former clients and told them he was starting his own firm. By the second call, they were already aware of his demotion at Warren Construction. By the third, he stopped pretending and asked for contract scraps like a man scraping the last brown from the bottom of a pot. Do I intervene? I asked Michael over coffee one morning. No, he said. Gravity's doing the work. It wasn't long before Bradley came to my door, as if the hinges on his life had creaked loud enough to draw him back to the one place he still assumed would open. I didn't make him wait. I swung the door wide and stepped aside. He looked older in a way that had nothing to do with time. Jaw that had forgotten how to set, shoulders slumped under a coat too thin for the weather. Dad, he said, no preamble, no charm. Good. We need to talk about the house. The bank will talk to you, I said. That's how this works. They said you withdrew. His voice snagged on the last word the way a thread catches on a nail. I did. Why? I thought about giving him the speech, the one that might have been cathartic for me and useless for him. I thought about recounting the phone call before the funeral, the laugh in the background, Sam's voice ordering helium like joy comes on command. Instead, I made it plain. Because it's time you live in a house built on your decisions, I said, not mine. He flinched like I'd raised a hand to him. Sam's going to leave, he said, and the child in the statement laying naked between us. I can't do this. You can, I said. Or you can't. That's not my part to play anymore. He looked past me into the house as if he might catch a glimpse of Helen. Hair pinned back, a dish towel over her shoulder, eyes soft with the kind of pity she reserved for the weak and the dying. Finding nothing, he found anger. You always wanted to control me, he said. This is who you are. I'm exactly who I've always been, I answered. I just stopped paying for the privilege. The front step creaked when he turned. He'd grown out of crying years ago. Rage is cheaper anyway. Foreclosure has a choreography to it that looks bureaucratic from the outside and feels like a drumbeat for the one whose name is on the notice. Some letters don't begin with greetings and end without signatures. There are appointments where the banker keeps a stack of tissues just within reach, but never offers one. There is a gavel date at the courthouse in a public calendar posted near the elevator. You can walk past and put your finger on the entry like a man checking his pulse. I didn't tell anyone I planned to be there. I didn't want witnesses. I wanted clarity. The morning of the auction, I parked across the street in the kind of spot you can see the door from, but not the faces. The courthouse steps were already darkened by a thawing frost, a sheen that would make anyone careful. Men in work boots drifted together in knots. Contractors, flippers, a few curiosity seekers who treat other people's loss like a local sport. A woman in a navy suit whose name I didn't know stood apart with a clipboard. 2 places down from her, Linda Moore checked her watch and pretended not to notice me. I watched Bradley and Sam arrive. He'd chosen his good coat, the one he wore to weddings and interviews. She'd chosen a white coat with a fur collar that made a statement I couldn't read. They stood close enough to touch, but didn't. When the county clerk cleared his throat and began to read the description, legalese that reduced my son's home to lot numbers and offsets, Sam's chin lifted like the sight of their life and bullet points was somehow beneath her. The opening bid sounded reasonable in the abstract. $280,000 for a 4-bedroom colonial with a yard big enough to pretend you'll plant tomatoes next spring. The first contractor took it up by 5. A second bidder pushed 10. Bradley didn't raise a paddle. He'd done the math and found the balance. He scanned the crowd like he might find a friend. I saw her then, the woman in navy, stepping forward with practiced timing. $312, she said, voice steady. The contractor tried once more, then fell back, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. $317, she added when the moment asked for it. The clerk looked past her, giving the room a chance to breathe. Going once, and in that second, Bradley understood. Not who she was, not her name, but the shape of me behind her. He turned, searching through the windshield. With the glass between us, our eyes met. Going twice, the clerk said, "Sold." He finished. The gavels wouldn't kiss on the podium, small and final. Linda was at the bidder's elbow before the sound faded. Notary stamp ready, documents in order. She didn't look toward my truck. She didn't need to. We'd done our looking already. In the weeks of preparation, where everything that could be in place was in place, and everything that could go wrong had been imagined until it lost its power to surprise. Bradley moved toward the woman, words ready that died when the security officer lifted a hand without touching him. Sam found volume where he found heat. "This is theft," she snapped, loud enough for the walls to hear. "You can't just." The bank-hen, the officer said, not unkindly, the way nurses deliver bad test results and then stand still because there's nowhere else to go. And they did. He didn't say your father did. He didn't have to. Sam's eyes found me through the windshield, a hawk in a white coat. Then she looked at Linda. Something in her understood then, maybe because women see the systems men build without admitting they see them. Her mouth thinned into a line that would cut anything placed across it. "This isn't over," she told no one in particular, which is the thing people say when their list of options has shrunk to 1 and they don't like what's written there. When the crowd thinned, I got out of the truck. My shoes made a clean sound on the courthouse steps. Bradley stood at the bottom like a boy who's been sent outside the principal's office. He didn't speak. I did. "The amount," I said quietly, "matches the outstanding balance to the dollar. The bank gets whole. No one profits from your loss. Not me. Not the foundation." His jaw worked. "You're proud of yourself," he said. "No," I said. "I'm done with you letting me carry the pride for both of us." Sam stepped in, a blade disguised as a wife. "He's your son. What family?" I asked, not because I didn't know the answer, but because the question told the truth better than a statement ever could. Family shows up at a funeral. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. "You're a bitter old man," she said finally, choosing insult over logic, the way a cornered animal chooses noise over speed. "We'll sue. Do what you think you should," I said. The security officer drifted closer, present without pressing. Linda passed behind us, paperwork in a neat stack, head down, pace brisk. Riverbend Holdings LLC. The name we'd chosen after 6 calls with Michael, 3 with our accountant, and a quiet afternoon where I sat with a pencil and wrote out every variation of river names I'd ever crossed, was now the legal owner of the house at Maple Ridge. The foundation would lease it back for a time to a family that needed shelter more than they needed a lesson. Later, it would be renovated then donated. There are ways to redeem pain that don't involve the person who caused it. Bradley made a small sound then, not a sob, not a word, just a thing that escaped him when the scaffolding fell. He turned and walked away. Sam followed 2 steps behind, heels striking the stone like they were angry at the earth. The keys changed hands in a small office 2 weeks later. There was no ceremony, just a county clerk with a mug that said "World's Okayest Mom," a notary stamp, and Linda's quiet efficiency. As she slid manila folders from a leather portfolio, when it was done, Linda passed me 1 copy to keep. I filed it without looking. Paper is heavy when it's the last in a stack. On my way back to the truck, I saw a couple in the corridor holding hands, dressed like they'd left work early but didn't want to look like it. She had a toddler on her hip. He had paint on his knuckles that wouldn't scrub off with anything short of a week. When they passed me, I heard her whisper, "Do you think this could happen?" He said, "One thing at a time." I didn't know their names yet. I would. For now, I took them as a sign that the house on Maple Ridge would be something other than a monument to entitlement, a place that absorbs children's laughter better than lawyers' arguments. Helen had a way of finding the right people in a crowd without trying. I've had to learn. That evening, the phone rang. For a second, the number on the screen looked like every other unknown number until it didn't. Bradley. I let it go to voicemail. Not to avoid, to record. He didn't leave a message. Of course, he didn't. He hung up and called again, then a 3rd time, timing the rings to be just long enough to say, "I can still push a button and make you look at my name." When the ringing stopped, the house settled. I poured a glass of water and took